The chief priest and scribes wanted to kill Jesus, just not during Passover. Why wait? Because they feared the crowd, but they apparently didn't fear God. We're starting Mark chapter 14. Let's read verses 1 and 2 from the ESV. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him, for they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people." Chapter 13 contained the Olivet Discourse, in which Jesus detailed future events in response to a question about the destruction of the temple. Chapter 14 begins with a fascinating feature. Mark, our narrator, tells us something that he should not be able to know. He describes the behind-the-scenes machinations of the chief priests and scribes. How does he know this? Who told him? Mark doesn't say. Some readers will immediately default to, God must have told him. Perhaps he did, but it would have been helpful for Mark to have mentioned that, wouldn't it? What else can explain this knowledge? For as long as humans have told stories and written them down, narrators have always exercised creative license to fill in the gaps of a story and facilitate its motion forward. Whether this was direct inspiration or an editorial choice by Mark, these verses transition us from the Olivet Discourse to the events leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus. Let's break these verses down into 3 parts. Look at verse 1, A. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. When did this happen? 2 days before Passover, the annual feast commemorating the deliverance of the Hebrews from slavery in Egypt, described in Exodus chapter 12. The Feast of Unleavened Bread, which begins in conjunction with Passover, is a week-long celebration of God's provision for the people in their flight from Egypt. Passover is one of the feasts of obligation. If you were able to get to Jerusalem, you were supposed to travel there for Passover. So during this week, Jerusalem and the surrounding areas were bursting at the seams with Jewish pilgrims who had traveled there for Passover. If the traditional timeline holds true and Jesus is crucified on Friday, the events of verses 1 and 2 would be taking place on Tuesday or Wednesday. On to the rest of verse 1. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. The chief priests and the scribes, the authorities who controlled the temple and the practices of Judaism, were engaged in a pursuit. There's a grammatical nugget here that is informative. When Mark writes that they were seeking, he uses a verb tense called the imperfect. That doesn't mean it was flawed, it means that the action wasn't complete. They were engaged in an ongoing process of seeking a way to arrest Jesus. It wasn't a simple one-and-done decision. They needed to figure out how to pull this off. What was the difficulty? Mark says the arrest would be by stealth. The Greek is literally, they were seeking how to seize him in deceit. This doesn't mean deceit on Jesus' part, as if they were going to catch him in a falsehood. It means that the seizure itself was going to be a deceit, or a falsehood. The basis of the arrest was going to be false, made up, fake. It's worth noting that in chapter 12, Jesus was approached with multiple questions intended to trap him and expose him as a false teacher. That didn't work, and Jesus only gained favor with the common people. So now, the religious leaders are prepared to forget about discrediting Jesus and will create false charges to arrest him. With what goal? To punish him? To correct him? No, to kill him. The temple rulers are seeking a way to create a deceitful basis to arrest and kill Jesus. But why would they do such a thing? There are many theories about their motives. I will propose 3 for your consideration. First, Jesus teaches under his own authority, without the sanction of these temple leaders, and he's wildly popular. He has been vocally critical of them, calling them hypocrites and saying they devour widows' houses, so he is a direct threat to their position and control. Second, on Sunday of this week, he was welcomed into the city with shouts, cheers, and the trappings of the arriving Messiah. And then he called the temple a den of robbers and cast out the buyers and sellers. Again, This is a threat to the position of the temple leaders, as the people see Jesus standing up to their corrupt leadership. And finally, Rome. The popularity of Jesus with the people, especially with the overt messianic themes of the triumphal entry to Jerusalem, makes him a dangerous presence in the city. If he decided to rally the people against the Roman occupiers, the natural response from Rome would be devastating violence and destruction. If the temple leadership believes that Jesus is not the Messiah, his influence with the people poses a threat to the lives of all the people, not just to the authority of the leaders. What do you think motivated the temple leaders? Let me know in the comments. On to verse 2. For they said, "Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people." So they are seeking a way to seize and kill Jesus, but not yet. Not during the feast. In about a week, the city will empty as the Passover pilgrims return to their homes. The potential powder keg gets smaller after the masses leave Jerusalem. So what do we see happening in these two verses? From Mark's perspective, the chief priests and scribes are engaged in a premeditated plan to kill Jesus, and they are prepared to use corrupt tactics to do so. The only thing that is keeping the religious leaders from carrying out an unjust murder is fear. But it isn't a fear of God. It's a fear of the reaction of the common people. What is the scariest takeaway from these verses? The most religious people in the community, the authorities on Scripture, prophecy, and the history of the covenant people either cannot or will not consider that Jesus is, in fact, the Messiah for whom all Israel has been waiting. There is none so blind as those who will not see. Next time, a controversy over an expression of adoration. Thanks for studying with me. I'd love to hear your thoughts about these two verses in the comments.